Now, in today's webinar, the focus is going to be on presenting skills. Now, I'm sure you all know there are plenty of elements or ingredients that make up a successful presentation. Obviously, within a webinar, we will not be able to focus on all of these elements that will allow you to present with impact. However, in the time that is allocated to us today, we can certainly highlight some of the key ingredients that will allow you to prepare and to deliver more engaging presentations. Now, before I share with you some of the content prepared for this particular webinar, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jimmy Haddad. I'm currently a partner with Meirc Training and Consulting, focusing on designing, developing, and delivering training courses in the fields of human resources management and in the fields of interpersonal communication skills. I'm also a passionate trainer and a passionate presenter. I combine experiences in both Canada and the Middle East, and I would like to add that I'm a certified training practitioner and a certified professional in learning and performance. Now, the focus of our webinar today is going to be really threefold. I would like us to first shed some light on what constitutes great openings and what we call as previews of presentations. Then I'll proceed by discussing stories and examples that should be part and parcel of every successful presentation. And another important element in presenting is the control of body language. Now, I'm sure, as I mentioned earlier, you would all agree with me that there are other elements of successful presentations. However, the focus today is going to strictly be on these three things. Now, allow me to introduce you to Miss Clicker. Now, Miss Clicker is, figuratively speaking, she represents each and every member of your audience. Now, your listeners will give you seconds before they decide to switch you off, or maybe change channels, or maybe maintain their interest. Now, if you were to think of yourself watching TV in the afternoon or over the weekend, I'm sure that while you're holding the remote control in one hand, sitting on your sofas, it probably takes you seconds to decide on switching channels. So you'll probably be zapping between channels, and you'll not wait for more than seconds to decide whether you want to continue watching the current channel or decide to switch to another. Now, your audience during your presentations will probably give you slightly more than seconds to either switch off, in other words, to decide to start thinking of something else, or maybe if you can begin with a good opener, you can maintain their interest. Now, allow me to share with you this analogy. Before we actually go to the movies and watch cinema, most of us do watch the movie trailer. Now, if the movie trailer leaves a positive impression, then we will be more willing to actually go to the movie and buy the ticket, or even download the movie and watch it online. So you have to consider beginning your presentations with a great opening that would leave a positive impression. It should wow your audience and give them the required interest to actually sit there and listen to you for the duration of your presentation. Now, what we suggest in great openings and preview, that you need to consider having a James Bond opening. Now, many of us have watched the James Bond series, and if you remember, the James Bond series begin with a few minutes that would really attract us viewers to watch the entire movie, because the alternative would be a classical opening which will leave you audienceless. Now, when we say audienceless, it's you actually have the audience sitting there in front of you, but there will not be focused on whatever you're saying. Now, I've attended many presentations, and the classical openings of the presentations look something like this. Good morning. My name is Jimmy Haddad, and I have a very interesting topic that I think you may like. So I hope you can give me your attention. My topic today is about financial retirement planning. Now, yes, it's a classical opening, but I'm afraid that such openings might leave you audienceless. The alternative is perhaps considering something that might look like this, and this is only an example. If you currently have less than $10,000 in the bank, how can you retire with more than 1 million on hand? Now, that's an opening question. In the next 10 minutes, I am going to explain the 3 most rewarding personal savings techniques which can be employed by every monthly income professional. Now, notice there's a difference between the original classic opening and perhaps the new and improved opening that is more recommended. Now, let me try to dissect this into its elements. Now, you notice here we begin with a particular question, and it is then followed by the duration of the presentation and maybe elements or lessons that your audience will learn throughout the duration of the presentation. So if I were to dissect this into its elements, I would recommend that you begin your openers with what the presentation is about. You begin with something that has or can leave an interest with your audience, like an interesting message, and you need to explicitly state the need or why does the audience need to listen to you. If I go back to that example, now the way I try to stimulate interest is by asking that first question, which is, if you currently have less than $10,000 in the bank, how can you retire with more than 1 million on hand? Now, in order to explicitly state the need, I said something like, I'm going to explain the 3 most rewarding personal savings techniques which can be employed by every monthly income professional. So here, there is a combination of perhaps an interesting message and perhaps the need of why the audience should listen to you. Now, what the presentation is about, the presentation is obviously about financial planning for retirement. Now, some of you might be wondering here, well, when do we actually introduce ourselves? My recommendation has always been, do introduce yourself after you have delivered what we call the win opener. After you have verbalized what the presentation is about, what the interesting message, which could be in the form of a question, an anecdote, a quotation, maybe sharing a figure or a number and stating out the need, you can follow that with a brief on yourself. Depending on the type of presentation that you're doing, whether you're doing it for employees within the organization who might already know you, or you're doing it for individuals outside your organization, this will really determine how much you should share with your audience on yourself. But usually our recommendation is to introduce yourself right after the win, the what, the interest, and the need. Now, following the opening, another recommendation that we encourage our presenters to include is plenty of stories. And we advise that the stories and the examples that you use will keep your audience engaged and connected. Now, we also recommend that you play it safe and consider using examples from everyday life. And let me give you some examples here. Now, as you can see in front of you, most of us have played a sport Most of us have had burgers at McDonald's, and plenty of us do actually like cooking, or maybe enjoy, eating cooked meals. So in this particular example, what you need to do is to try to generate examples that your audience can connect with. Now, here you can compare, for instance, certain elements of your presentation to a football game. Or you can compare certain elements of your presentation to the famous Big Mac at McDonald's. Or you can compare certain elements of your presentation to the ingredients of a chicken biryani, or perhaps any of your favorite dishes. Now, to give you a more concrete examples, let me start with the ingredients of a chicken biryani. Now, the ingredients of a chicken biryani can be easily comparable to perhaps the characteristics of a successful trainer. Now, let me clarify here. To prepare a really delicious biryani, you probably need rice, you probably need chicken, you probably need onions, you probably need yogurt if you'd like it with yogurt, and not to forget the famous spices. Now, to really be a successful trainer, you also need certain characteristics. You need to be a subject matter expert. You need to be well prepared. You need to have excellent communication skills. You need to be organized, and you need to be engaging. So, similar to having ingredients to a chicken biryani, you have characteristics for a successful trainer. If you are presenting on the characteristics of successful trainer, it will be interesting for you to think of examples where you can connect the characteristics to ingredients of dishes, or to any other examples or perhaps stories that you can recite. I often, compare the structure of a successful presentation to a Big Mac from McDonald's. Now, every Big Mac would have bun, would have the patty, would have the lettuce, some tomato, would have the dressing of the Big Mac. Now, and not forget the pickles, obviously. And every successful presentation would have content, would have visual aids, would have a certain style. So these, again, are elements of a presentation that can be compared to a Big Mac or any burger for that sort. On the presentation on strategy, one can compare the elements of a successful organizational strategy to the elements that constitute a winning football team. If Barcelona or Real Madrid were to win the UEFA Champions League in any season, then they would probably need a good offense, good defense, including a goalkeeper, and good middle line. Now, for any organization to have a successful strategy, they also have to have certain elements from vision and mission to strategic objectives to certain actions that would require the proper implementation of that strategy. And honestly, the list is endless. Now, a lot of times when presenters are developing, preparing, and planning their content, their focus most of the time is on what they want to share. Now, with subject matter experts who have already, already know the what, and they're really experts in the field, our recommendation is for them to focus on how they want to present. And on switching to how they want to present, we recommend that they focus on generating plenty of stories and plenty of examples, generic stories and examples that people can connect with. To add to these stories, we all visit, doctors and clinics, and these can also be used for making certain comparisons. Those who like sports, who like running, can compare, completing a marathon perhaps to the various stages of any product life cycle. I actually was in a presentation just today, and a gentleman was comparing the various elements of maintenance and the maintenance life cycle to the actual life of a human being from birth to death. So again, good presenters are those who have plenty of stories in their repertoire and plenty of examples they can highlight throughout the presentation. My third and final element that I want to share with you today in this webinar focuses on body language and the control of body language. Now, in the control of body language, I would like to start with the eyes. Now, in terms of the eyes, the question here is, where should you focus on? Where should you look during any presentation that you have? Now, these are some of my recommendations. First of all, try not to look down and try not to look up. When I say down, don't look at the floor. When I say up, don't look at the ceiling. Although many times during presentations, one might feel that they might require some inspiration to come from somewhere. Trust me, in most cases, it will not come either from looking at the ground nor by looking at the ceiling. I also recommend not to look at the side walls within a room. Rather, try to focus on looking at the individuals that are sitting in your audience. Now, having said that, try to spread your looks evenly across all the audience. And perhaps the best technique to use here is what is known as the lighthouse technique. Now, a lighthouse is nothing more than light that guides actually ships and vessels when they want to dock on the ports. Now, the lighthouse does 360 movement of the lights to assist these ships in docking. In your presentations, I want you to consider doing what's known as the 180-degree lighthouse effect by looking at the eyes of your audience from left to right. Now, some may ask, well, how long should you spend on each person? The recommendation that we provide is, in a larger group, do spend 2 to 3 seconds on each individual. In a much smaller group, you can afford to spend slightly more, 3 to 5 seconds. Now, with that in mind, sometimes during your presentations, you might have individuals that have warm facial expressions and others that might have slightly more aggressive facial expressions. In these circumstances or in these instances, I would also recommend perhaps to try to spend less time, maybe fewer seconds, by looking at those who have more of an aggressive facial look. And focus on those who have a warmer face, maybe they have a warmer smile. Trust me, that will keep you more engaged during the presentation. Now, another part of the body which needs you to control are the hands. And in terms of the hands, the first of the recommendations for gentlemen not to put their hands in their pockets. And to be very honest with you, when I started my career as a facilitator, I had actually stitched closed 2 pairs of pants that I used to wear on my training days. I was guilty of putting my hands in my pockets at times, and to resolve that, I had to actually stitch close my pockets. Now, animating the hands is also a recommendation, and when I say animating the hands is really trying to have some coordination between what you're saying verbally and what you're presenting on the hands. Let me give you an example. If you are presenting a number during your presentation, so assume you say there are 3 things you want your audience to focus on, it is highly recommended to flash the number 3 on one of your hands. If there are 4 things, flash the number 4. So this will provide some sort of synchronization between your hands and what you are saying verbally. Now, highly recommended as well not to fold your arms when you are presenting. So try to keep a natural open stance as much as possible, and do animate the hands, especially in the opener of your presentation. Now, another element to consider in body language is the actual body itself, the entire body. Now, the recommendation here is to maintain an open stance throughout the presentation. Now, what we mean by an open stance is to be standing somewhere where everybody can see you, and your shoulders are squared towards all participants. And when we say all participants, is try to get a certain angle where you can only move your head or your neck to be able to see everybody. Now, the other recommendation is to have your feet shoulder width apart in line with your entire body. Obviously, the other recommendation is not to lean forward or backward, and maintain an upright position, a natural position that would show confidence in your ability in presenting to any type of audience. Now, maintaining control of body language, whether it be the eyes, whether it be the hands, or even the body, is perhaps easier said than done. Now, there are techniques that one can learn, or tips that I can share with you in this regard. And when it comes to the body, for those that have a tendency to perhaps move a lot during the presentation from one side to the other, blocking perhaps the projector or the light in the projector from time to time, I highly recommend that perhaps in your practice, in your rehearsals, you perhaps try to tape your feet to the floor. And by taping the feet, maybe you can invest in masking tape and just cut a small piece of that, fold it around, and just stick it on the bottom sole of your shoe. Trust me, the next time you will feel tempted to walk, you will hear the sound of the masking tape as it sticks from the ground, and you'll realize that, you know what, maybe standing still and animating the hands will provide more focus during my presentation, especially in the open. Now, it's also recommended not to stand still throughout the whole presentation. And for me, standing still throughout the whole presentation is just like any statue that you see in any city around the world that has been there for years and years and years and years. If you walk by this statue every single day, I'm sure you will have ideas that perhaps this is the most boring statue you've ever seen, simply because that statue is still and is not moving. Now, proper preparation in any presentation is really the key in preventing poor performance. And being prepared for a presentation requires plenty of time. The preparation for me begins really with considering the elements of your opener. And to remind you with the elements of the opener, you need to really think of what your presentation is about, and do consider an attractive title. Don't just call your presentation any title. You can have a presentation that has the simple title of presentation skills, and you can have another similar presentation that you may call making powerful presentation. So do consider developing an attractive title. Prepare the title, prepare your interesting message, something that would really interest your audience. And for the interesting message, I use a simple technique or a simple test to make sure that it is interesting. I'll probably share that interesting message with people that are either friends or family members, and I try to ask for their opinion. If the message is interesting to them, then chances are the message might be interesting to my audience. And do remember, when you are preparing, to highlight the main reasons why the audience need to listen to you. What are you going to teach them? What are you going to share with them? What benefits they will get from listening to you for the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 1 hour, regardless of the duration. So when you're preparing, prepare a win opener and focus on how you want to direct that win opener. When you're also preparing, prepare plenty of stories. There isn't enough, or there's no time where stories can get boring for your audience. The more you have, the better your presentations will be. And often I tell participants that people might forget your name and they might forget, unfortunately, some of the content that you have shared. But if your stories and examples were powerful, chances are they will remember you through these stories and examples that you have shared. And when you are preparing yourself, make sure that you spend some time on rehearsing your eye movement, on rehearsing your hand movement, and on rehearsing the full control of your body language. With these quick recommendations on presenting with impact, this concludes my webinar for today. I want to thank you all for logging in and attending yet another Meirc webinar for 2018. And I hope you stay tuned for plenty of more webinars to come this year and the years to come. Having said that, I will open up the chat for any additional questions that you may have, and I wish you all a happy remainder of the day.
Meirc.com